I'm really looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks so much, Laura, and to Seb and Brooke for those introductions to the work that you guys have all been doing. So as Laura said, my name's Indigo and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society at RMIT, and it is a mouthful. It's a bit ridiculous. I'd like to begin my talk by paying my respects to the custodians of the land that I'm joining you all from today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and sovereignty over these lands was never ceded. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to the respects of the lands and the elders that you are each joining from, and to any First Nations peoples joining us today. I'm really delighted to be here today representing the Australian Digital Inclusion Index team. The ADII is led by distinguished Professor Julian Thomas and Joe Barakat, in addition to Dr. Sharon Parkinson, who's the senior researcher on the team, and myself. I want to flag up a couple of things just quickly. Firstly, I'm going to pop a timer on because, as is the wont of many academics, we can really talk for quite a long time. So to make sure that I stick within time, I'm going to do that. I also want to apologise. I feel like I'm moving like a robot. I have a flared up compounded disc in my neck at the moment. So I'm like moving quite robotically. So I promise I'm not normally this static. And I'm going to use my time today to talk really briefly about our approach to digital inclusion and how we're tackling the challenge of measuring it. And in doing that, I want to flag a couple of things. So firstly, the way that we've revised the index for this year and detailing the sorts of changes that we've made. Take a quick look at the findings at the national level, and we'll wrap up with a couple of opportunities that the revised index presents and that we're really excited about. So digital inclusion for us is about the capacity to access, afford, and have the skills to use the internet and digital technologies to support meaningful participation in everyday life. The index is here to provide a robust evidence base for policy, for research, and for better practice in relation to improving digital inclusion across the country. And to do that, we aim to measure digital inclusion levels at a national, state, and regional level so that we can provide some geographic granularity. And we also aim to measure digital inclusion over time so that we can see what the key trends are and how we're working towards progressing these things. Now, in October of 2021 this year, we launched a revised index, and key to that revision is our new approach to data collection through a purpose-built survey instrument called the Australian Internet Usage Survey. Prior to 2021, we used the Roy Morgan survey data that was really tremendous and allowed us to do a lot of really great work. But with this survey, as I'll talk about a little bit further, we're able to make the results more publicly accessible than ever before, and we're able to partner with community groups to use the same survey questions to do bespoke digital work, which is something that we weren't able to do before. And so this is a pretty significant change to how we measure digital inclusion. And the changes are designed to deal with the increasing complexity and diversity of Australians' engagement with digital services. But really importantly, we're retaining our fundamental approach to the problem of digital exclusion. So we're approaching it still through those three key frameworks of access, affordability, and digital ability. But we've updated the way we're measuring them, and we're trying to make them more future focused to accommodate the rapidly developing technologies that we're seeing used every day. These changes are intended to recognise the changing requirements of digital inclusion, and we think that they extend the valuable contribution we've made in identifying and addressing digital inequality since 2015, while also ensuring the index's relevance into the coming years. And as I've already mentioned, we've made a whole lot of changes in the way we are communicating the findings. So from a really long PDF report to interactive data dashboards that you can use and download the data to investigate your own concerns. And I'll show you what they look like towards the end of today's chat. Awesome. So in terms of the revised index construction, as I've already mentioned, we're talking about those same three approaches of access, affordability, and digital ability. And we might go to the next slide. Thanks, Laura. So when we're talking about access, we're now asking things about how often people are accessing the internet, how much people are connecting, how often they're online, what sort of connection they have, and whether it's fixed broadband or if it's mobile only, how much data they have and what sort of bandwidth they get for that data, and what kinds of devices they have. So we're including questions around desktops, laptops, smartphones, and now for the first time we're also engaging with questions around smart home devices and personal smart home things like smartwatches and things like that. My brain just completely forgot what a smartwatch was. Next slide, please, Laura. When it comes to affordability, we're also taking a different approach here. So in the past, we looked at the percentage of actual household spend on the internet, and then we looked at what you got for that spend, that value of expenditure. We're thinking now about what is required for a high quality, reliable connection to the internet, which can do the kinds of things that Australian households are now required to do online, from homeschooling and working from home, as many of us still are, through to telehealth of all kinds. So instead of looking at what people actually have and what they're actually spending, we're thinking about a bundle of internet services that would theoretically give people this quality and reliability. So we've looked at that as a fast internet service, such as a cable HFC service or NBN 50 or above, something that provides unlimited monthly data allowance through a fixed broadband service, and mobile broadband or mobile phone data allowance above 61 gigabytes a month. We think that this kind of internet bundle would enable both quality and reliable connectivity. And so then the question, still on this old slide. Then the question becomes, what proportion of people's income do they have to spend to get that? What would go towards covering the costs of this particular bundle of services? And we calculate that differently for a family and a single-headed household, but it allows us to sort of better reflect the impact of cost barriers to digital inclusion. And as we'll talk about shortly, reveals some stark disparities in terms of equity, both across the country and within demographics. All right, on to the next one. Thanks, Laura. And then finally, when we're talking about digital ability, we've aligned our approach to an international set of measures called the Internet Skills Scale that's developed by researchers from the UK and the Netherlands, Van Dersen, Helsper and Einon. And it looks at a broader range of skills that we've looked at previously. So we're thinking about basic operational skills, getting online, doing your basic things, advanced operational, moving beyond that, being able to manipulate the internet a little bit more, using it for what you need to do, information navigation skills, so finding things out, asking questions, through to social, literally engaging with other people, creative, so making things online, and through to automation, and considering those smart home devices and technologies there. And we think these skill sets that we're measuring are responding better to the complexity and diversity of people's engagement with the internet and digital services at the moment. So next slide, thanks. All right, so now that you've got a sense of the index revision, I want to just quickly run us through the key findings. So as in previous years, at a national level, at an aggregate level, we've seen that digital inclusion is slowly improving. So at a national level, from an average index score of 67.5 in 2020 to 71.1 in 2021, we've got an increase of 3.6 points there. There is, however, an ongoing difference between the results we see in capital cities and those that we see in the regions. And while the divide between metropolitan and regional scores does seem to be narrowing over time, it's still marked. So regional areas record an index score in 2021 of 67.4, which is 3.6 points lower than the national average, and a pretty massive 5.5 points lower than metropolitan Australia. Next slide, please. The improvement that we're seeing from 2020 to 2021 is evident across each of the three index dimensions. Something that I want to draw attention to on this slide is the quite high score for affordability, which has come out of that new approach that we've taken. And this score reflects the fact that for many Australians, affordability of internet services is not a significantly serious problem, but it is for a range of key groups. So as we'll see on the next slide. And so I just want to highlight that although we have those high numbers for affordability, we haven't solved the problem. And on the next slide, we'll see that a more meaningful approach to looking at this is that percentage of household income that's required to gain access to that internet bundle that I just discussed. So while 21% of the Australian population could afford that internet bundle with just 2% of their annual income, a quarter of the Australian population would need to pay up to 10% of their household income to get it, and 14% would need to pay more than 10% to gain access to it. And I think this is, quite alarming, these figures, and thinking about digital access in the same way that we think about questions of rental or mortgage stress, I think is a particularly fruitful way to kind of further these discussions. Next slide, please, Laura. So looking at the distribution of digital inclusion in Australia across the different states and territories, there is, as I've already mentioned, that significant gap between metro areas and those in regional Australia. But it's also clear that there are some significant differences in outcomes between the different states. So in 2021, ACT has got a whopping score of 77. They're doing quite well. But Tasmania and South Australia are lagging a little bit behind. So they've got the lowest levels of digital inclusion in terms of state level results. The other states are all pretty reasonably near the national average. Victoria, where most of us, I think, are from today, are at 72.0 points, so slightly higher than the national average. But of greater significance, it seems, are those between those metropolitan and regional areas, but also those differences that we see in the social and economic distribution of digital inclusion. Next slide. So there is a lot of information on this slide, but the main thing to look at here are where are the highs and the lows. So digital inclusion in Australia, as elsewhere around the world, is distributed according to a number of different key attributes or aspects of people's lives. How digitally included you are depends a great deal on how old you are, how much education you have, on how much income you have, what kind of housing you have, and the household structure. So we can see here that there's a very big gap between those in higher income quintiles and those in lower income quintiles. We find there's also a big difference between single person households and households where we have a couple with children. And actually in 2021, all household types with children are the most digitally included in the country, which I think reflects a lot about, keeping up with your kids and needing to make sure you've got the internet for school and all of that kind of stuff. But what this is really showing us is that there is a very significant and very uneven distribution of digital inclusion across the population. And what we're looking at is not an inclusive internet, but a socially and geographically stratified internet. And I think we need to bear that in mind when we're thinking about the kinds of things that need to be done to fix it. Next slide, please. So in terms of the big things that we need to take away, I think, from our data collection this year is some of these key findings here. So that 11% highly excluded, this year we've taken a new approach in terms of identifying highly excluded through to highly included Australians. Highly excluded Australians are those who receive an index score of 45 or below compared to the national average of over 71. So these are people who are substantially excluded from the opportunities that are presented by participation online. It's 11% of Australians in that category. And this is down from 2020, so there has been some improvement there, and this might be reflected due to COVID. We've had a digital uplift, more people have moved online, but we're still seeing a very substantial number in that group. We also still have a substantial subset of mobile-only users in Australia, 9.6% of the national population. And these are people who don't have a fixed broadband connection, and while mobile plans are getting better, we know that it does impact the kinds of things that you can do and also the amount of money that you're spending on your service. Related to that, affordability remains a significant and persistent issue. 14% of the Australian population would need to pay more than 10%, as we've already discussed. And while we see access improving, the evidence is that the improvements are not evenly shared. Next slide, please. So these are the critical gaps. There's a gap of 15.9 points between somebody who's employed and somebody who's not in the labour force. There's a 26-point difference between those in the lowest and highest income quintiles. There's a 33 points difference between those in our 18 to 34 age group and those who are 75 or older, and a 25-point gap between those who've got a degree and those who didn't finish secondary school. And I think it's important for us to remember that we're dealing with new data derived from a new questionnaire. So we've collected data through these methods for both 2020 and 2021, but this data isn't comparable to our old reports. But we are seeing the same patterns. These same gaps have been documented in our previous reports, so we're really confident in the new approach that we're taking. Next slide, please. I think I am close to finish time. So here is a quick view of what the new dashboards look like. They cover the range of data that we've generated, enabling you to dig into the data to a level of detail that we've not been able to provide before. You can export the data, you can cut it by social demographic groups, you can filter it by social demographic groups, and we really hope that you find these as useful as we do. Alrighty, so that's a very quick overview of the index revision and those key findings. And I invite you all to visit our new website and to explore the website data yourself. I think there's another slide, Laura. Can we jump to that one? Yeah, so this is my final two things that I want to talk about. Firstly, for the first time ever, we're able to provide index scores at the LGA level. We're excited to see how this more granular data is used by councils and community groups. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do to support this work. And secondly, and somewhat relatedly, because we now own the survey tool that underpins the revised index, we're able to partner with community groups to conduct bespoke digital inclusion research. We're currently, for instance, working with a range of councils in northeastern Victoria to measure the digital inclusion held by workers within the small to medium enterprises in those regions. So again, I really welcome questions or comments or follow-up around that sort of work. Thanks very much.